Hey hockey card fans, welcome back to the channel. Today I got my eBay package that I've been waiting for. Got a pretty good deal on eBay. I think I paid $13 for 10 cards. I paid just over $13 for 10 cards, but of course I had to pay almost $10 in shipping, which kind of sucked, but that's what it is when you're dealing with people that are further away, and they do fast shipping, which is nice, better than the snail mail. So I'm not going to complain over a couple of extra bucks for shipping. And it was packaged really nicely, so he put some money into the packaging. Not going to complain about shipping. So this one came all the way from Calgary. I'll put a link in the description of the seller, because he is a pretty good guy. I bought from him before. If I can get it open. He did a really good job in packaging. He did. Now these are all from the 1972-73 O-PEE-CHEE set. So this is when Montreal won the Stanley Cup in 1973. Then Ken Dryden went on a hiatus for a year, and Montreal could have went on a little mini dynasty run if they kept him in goal. Instead, they had to go to Michel Plessé and Wayne Thomas at net. Dryden had left a huge hole in their crease when he left for a year because of a contract dispute. These cards, this set is interesting because it has red and green on their borders. The American ones have blue and yellow as well. Anyway, let's take a look at these cards. All right, so that took a long time to get that unwrapped. The seller he really wrapped these really well. McKinley Sports Cards, I think they're out of Calgary. He is really well wrapped, so definitely worth all the shipping costs. First up, we have number 2, California Golden Seals goaltender Gillies Malash. He was an excellent goalie who played on a lot of bad teams, and this was no exception here. Look at the pads, the stick, the blocker, and the trapper. Like back then, the equipment wasn't not like it is today. He looks really small, tiny compared to most goaltenders now. These cards are in really good shape. There's one little ding in the corner, no big deal. Like I said, it has a red border. The first 132 cards had a red border. Then the rest had a green border. The cardboard was pretty cheap. I've seen some that are really light brown to dark brown. Has a little comic. Definitely like this one. It's an interesting set. Gillies Malash was actually drafted by the Chicago Blackhawks in the 5th round, 70th overall in the 1970 amateur draft. So Gillies Malash was traded on October 18, 1971 with Paul Schmier in exchange for another goalie, Jerry Desjardins. This was to complete the Gary Smith trade. Desjardins was returned to the Blackhawks because his broken arm had not healed. So I guess Gary Smith went to Chicago, because Jerry Desjardins had broken his arm. That's an interesting move. I'm not sure what to make of that. That means that, interesting. So Malash went there. Malash, he stayed with the California Golden Seals all through their history. He then traveled when the team was moved to Cleveland. He was there, and then he was with the Minnesota North Stars when Cleveland kind of merged with Minnesota because both teams were not doing well. And the merger between Cleveland and Minnesota made them so much better. And you can tell by 1979, Minnesota was a young team up and rising. 1980, they upset the Montreal Canadiens in the playoffs. And then 81, they went to a Stanley Cup final. Malash had played 11 playoff games in 80 and 13 in 81. Malash and Gary Edwards had been the tandem back then, and were not bad. Gary Edwards moved around a lot. And then Don Beaupre came in, and Malash and Beaupre shared the nets for quite a few years until Malash went to Pittsburgh. All right, next up we have left winger New York Islanders Ernie Hick. I have a few of his cards as well. Ernie Hick had played with the California Golden Seals, went to the Atlanta Flames as part of the expansion draft, and then went to the New York Islanders. And then halfway through the 72-73 season, he went to the New York Islanders, where he played like one game. Then in 75, he was traded from the Islanders to Minnesota, and then finished his career with the LA Kings. Only played 2 playoff games in his entire career. 520 NHL games, 2 playoff games. Had a goal in one of those 2 playoff games with the Minnesota North Stars. He had actually been in the Montreal Canadiens farm system. Traded from Montreal Canadiens with round 1 pick in the 1970 draft, which turned out to be Chris Oldleifson, to the Oakland Seals from Francois Lacombe, round 1 pick in the 1971 draft in cash. Claimed an expansion draft by the Atlanta Flames, traded from Atlanta Flames with future consideration in New York for Arnie Brown. Then got traded with Doug Rombrow from the Islanders to Minnesota for Jean-Paul Parise. That's an interesting trade. I think I would have to say the Islanders won that trade. Parise was a pretty good player for them. Poor guy only played 2 playoff games, though. That kind of sucks. Next up, we have California Golden Seals defenseman Marshall Johnson. These cards are in beautiful shape for their age and style. I do like that jersey for the California Golden Seals. It's the Oakland A colors, because the owner of the Seals was also the owner of the A's. He started his career with the Minnesota North Stars, then got traded to California Golden Seals. Only spent 3 seasons with the Seals, no playoff games, but 251 regular season games. So he was traded from Minnesota North Stars with a round 1 pick in the 72 draft, Dave Gardner, and cash to Montreal Canadiens for Danny Grant and Claude LaRose. So Montreal had him, and then Montreal gave him up to the Seals. I wonder if he was part of the Lafleur trade. So for a lot of these things, either I go to Hockey DB or I go to NHL Historical Trade Tracker, and you can find out lots of stuff about these things. So on August 31st, 1971, California acquired Marshall Johnson from the Montreal Canadiens for cash. Christ, I always thought the Oakland Seals were cash strapped. Or the Oakland A's. Here they are sending cash to Montreal for a player. Amazing. Now they just trade contracts. So they take so much of a contract. Okay, next up we have Buffalo Sabres center Jerry Meehan. I think he was the captain at this time. Might have been an assistant. Can't really tell. He'd actually been drafted by the Toronto Maple Leafs back in 1963. 4th round, 21st overall. Then he was with the Philadelphia Flyers. Probably part of the expansion draft there. Claimed by the Buffalo Sabres from Philly in their expansion. Played for the Vancouver Canucks when he was traded with Mike Robitaille for Jocelyn Gouvernant and Brian McSheffrey. Never heard of that guy. Traded that same year, that same season, to Vancouver to Atlanta for Bob Murray. Then in 76, traded from the Atlanta Flames with Jean Lemieux and round 1 pick in the 76 draft to Washington Capitals for Bill Clement. That trade I remember, that's an interesting trade. Bill Clement, January 22nd, 1976. Bill Clement is the only NHL player that's played for three different teams on 3 consecutive nights in the NHL. So he played Friday night with the Washington Capitals. Then on Saturday he played in the All-Star game. Was traded that night. And then played Sunday night for Atlanta Flames in Philly. So played for 3 NHL teams on 3 consecutive nights. Because back then they didn't take a break for the All-Stars. And then he went back to the Washington Caps on waivers, but never played. So Jerry Meehan played for the Washington Capitals for 3.5 seasons, then played 2 games with the Cincinnati Stingers of the WHA. Now we got my first Hall of Famer. Serge Savard, defenseman for the Montreal Canadiens. Excellent defenseman. Not a bad GM. He won 7 Stanley Cups as a player with the Montreal Canadiens. He was part of the Big Three with Guy Lapointe and Larry Robinson. He had some injuries in 1979-80, as well as he broke a leg back in the 71-72, which kept him out of the Summit Series. And he was claimed off waivers by Winnipeg Jets from the Montreal Canadiens in October 5th, 1981. So he still wanted to play. He wasn't going to make the squad because they were going with a youth movement in Montreal at the end of the 81 season. And Ferguson, who had been a Montreal Canadian guy, John Ferguson was the general manager at Winnipeg. He just said, hey, come on over to Winnipeg and play for a couple of years. So he did. Played over 100 games at Winnipeg. That's how he ended his career. Then he went to be a GM in Montreal. He's responsible for 2 more Stanley Cups in Montreal. So he's got 9 altogether. Not bad to have on your resume. Now we got our second goalie here. St. Louis Blues goaltender, Wayne Stevenson. Look at that mask. That's not much of a mask. It looks like just a bunch of it looks like a cage. In fact, I think it is a cage. Not much there. He started his career with the St. Louis Blues. He was on the Canadian national team in the 60s. Went to the Philadelphia Flyers where he won a Stanley Cup. The second Flyers Stanley Cup. He was on the team. Only played 12 games. And only 2 in the playoffs. Then he went to the Washington Capitals. So he was traded from St. Louis Blues to Philadelphia Flyers for Randy Andreychuk and a round 2 pick in the 75 draft. So I'm going to say Philly won that deal. Because he wasn't a bad goalie. When Bernie Prompt was injured in 75-76, he stepped up. Had a .258 goals against average, 40 wins, 10 losses, 13 ties. That's pretty damn good. Couldn't get past Montreal in the playoffs. And then ended his career with the Washington Capitals where they acquired him. So Stevenson went to Washington in exchange for a 3rd-round pick, which turned out to be 47th overall, Barry Tabodingan. I can't even pronounce the last name. Washington won that deal. Not that Stevenson played a lot of games. He only played like 76 games with the Washington Capitals and was 22, 31, and 15. So not bad. Him and Mike Palmateer shared the goaltending duties in 80-81. All right. Now we're out of the red cards. We're going into the green back. So we're going with Pittsburgh Penguins center, Ron Schock. Like I said, this set was weird. The first half of the cards were red. The second half were all green. So Ron Schock later became a captain with them. I got a couple of his cards when he went to, including his last one when he went to Buffalo. He'd actually started his career with the Boston Bruins in the 60s. Then went to St. Louis, probably in the expansion draft. Then Pittsburgh, and then finally Buffalo for his final couple of years. So he's claimed an expansion draft by St. Louis Blues. So in '69, he got traded from St. Louis with Craig Cameron to Pittsburgh for Luan Gotti and round 1 pick in the 71 draft, which turned out to be Gene Carr. I'm going to say Pittsburgh won that deal simply because Gene Carr would eventually go back to Pittsburgh. Gene Carr went to Atlanta, then went back to Pittsburgh. Luan Gotti became a coach for St. Louis. And Ron Schock spent a lot of years, 7 years with Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh didn't have a bad team in the mid-70s. They had a really good team. Just couldn't get past the first round. Then we have left winger for the LA Kings, Bill Lesick. God, those are awful colors. So you think the California Golden Seals went the Oakland A colors? The LA Kings were using the LA Laker colors. Bill Lesick. I actually have his WHA card when he played for the Winnipeg Jets. He was with the Boston Bruins when they won a Stanley Cup in '70. And he played 2 games in the playoffs, 3 games in the regular season, so he would have got a cup ring. I don't think he got his name on the cup, though. And then he won 3 Avco trophies with the Winnipeg Jets. Played with the Philadelphia Flyers, LA Kings, and Washington Capitals. So he went to Philly in the expansion draft, then traded from Philly in '72 with Serge Bernier, Larry Brown, Jim Johnson to Los Angeles for Bill Flett, Eddie Joyelle, Ross Lonsberry, and Gene Potvin. Philly won that deal. Bill Flett, Cowboy Bill Flett, Ross Lonsberry, and Gene Potvin, as well as Eddie Joyelle. Oh Christ, Flett and Lonsberry won Stanley Cups with Philly. Bad trade on the Kings' part. That's why the Kings weren't that great, weren't that good in the 70s. Alright, my first rookie card here is Chicago Blackhawks center Lynn Powis. He was actually drafted by the Montreal Canadiens in the 6th round, 68th overall, the 69 draft. Won an AHL American Hockey League title with the Nova Scotia Voyageurs, then a Central Hockey League with the Omaha Knights. Spent 1 season in Chicago before going to the expansion draft to the Kansas City Scouts. Then went to the Calgary Cowboys of the WHA because he didn't like losing. Winnipeg Jets, where he won an Avco trophy. And he split time with the Indianapolis Racers. So then he played in Germany for a while. I have a couple of his cards. I have his second card, and then I have his WHA card as well, I think. I know I have a second-year card. His Kansas City Scout card I have. And then finally I have California Golden Seals left winger Stan Gilbertson. Gotta love the facial hair back then. This guy played 3.5 seasons with the California Seals, then went to St. Louis, and then went to Washington Capitals, and finally the Pittsburgh Penguins. So he played for a lot of bad teams. 428 regular season games, only 3 playoff games, and that was with Pittsburgh in the 70s. Had a goal and an assist for 2 points in 3 playoff games. So had a good playoff. Pittsburgh just couldn't get past who they were playing. He did win an American Hockey League title with the Hershey Bears. So there's that. So he's claimed in the intra-league draft by California Golden Seals from the Boston Bruins. So he's been in the Boston Bruins system. The interleague draft was a chance for teams to get rid of. It's like a waiver wire, the semblance of free agency, where the bottom teams could actually draft from the top teams. Then in '74, he got traded from California with Craig Patrick to St. Louis for Dave Gardner and Warren Butch Williams. I'm not sure who won that trade. '75, he was traded from St. Louis with Garnet Ace Bailey, who died in 9/11, to Washington Capitals for Denny Duperre. Again, can't think of who won that one. And then last, he was traded from Washington Capitals to Pittsburgh Penguins for Harvey Bennett. Traded for hard to say who won any of these trades. So there we have it, 10 cards. 3 California Golden Seals, 1 Hall of Famer in Serge Savard, 2 goalies. Yeah, I got 3 California Golden Seals there. Alright, so all you hockey card fans out there, let me know what you guys think of this little haul. Not bad. And who's your favorite goalie, Gillies Malash or Wayne Stevenson? Leave comments in the comment section. Until next time, this has been Hockey Night in Belmont. I'm out of here.